Welcome to today's day in history. Today's day in history, March 26, 1351, is the day that 30 Breton knights call out and defeat 30 English knights during the 100 Years' War. This is most commonly referred to as the Battle of the 30. Now, we're going to talk about quite a few things, and I figured I would put on my medieval costume for that with my super awesome sword. But let's talk about where we're at. Now, we are in France, and we're actually in the place of France called the Duchy of Brittany. Now, if you look on the map, it's a little piece of land that kind of juts out from France and is actually pretty close to England. So it was an area that was fought over quite a bit. Okay. Now, this area here, if you look a little bit closer, it has all kinds of little coves and perfect places for harbors, and there were tons and tons of little tiny cities all over the place. So let's see where we're at next. Now, I don't think we've talked about the 100 Years' War too much this year, but last year we did talk about it. And it's a pretty interesting time period where there was a series of wars fought between France and England. And most of these wars took place, well, for land and for property and, well, for money. But a lot of it had to do with who was supposed to be king. Now, there was a time period where 3 French kings died within a very short period, which left the only heir, Edward III, who was English. Now, the French didn't like the idea of the King of France being English, so they actually put on the throne, I believe, a cousin of one of the kings, Philip VI. In the beginning, King Edward, or Edward III, he was okay with this, but as time went on, things kind of got out of control. Edward went back to England, and then what eventually started was a 100-year period of warfare. This encompasses the Battle of Agincourt, which we talked about with Henry V. All kinds of different battles took place in this time, and it's a pretty well-documented period in European history. Now, the Battle of the 30 is just a minor little battle that actually didn't really matter, but it's a really interesting story, and for days in history, that's what I like. So, now, let me tell you about the Code of Chivalry from my scroll. This is a really old scroll, so I gotta be careful. Now, hold on a second here, wait a second. I gotta put this over there. Now, the Code of Chivalry says this: nobility of service, which means your job is to serve the nobility. Your job is to take care of the things that you are asked to do. Number 2, death before dishonor. Honor was extremely important for the Code of Chivalry and for knights and people that lived in this time period. You needed to be honest. You needed to have honor, and people would rather die than have their honor taken away. Number 3, enterprise and obedience to rule, which means you respected the rule of law. If the king told you to do something, it was your job to do it. Respect all worthy people. People that are of a higher standard than you or a higher class, you needed to respect them. Honor all those above your station, similar to the last one I just said. Command obedience through respect. You should not have to scare people to get them to follow you. You should be so honorable, so chivalrous, that people will follow you just because they respect you so much. Scorn those who are not noble. People that do not follow this code, you look down upon them and they are not good people. Protect the innocent. This is a very important one. There were a lot of people, a lot of peasants at the time, but people considered innocent, or women and children, and it was your job to protect them. Punish the guilty. People that were found guilty of something, well, I think that's pretty straightforward. You're supposed to punish them. Courtesy to all ladies. I have a feeling that ladies first, and a lot of the holding the door open for for women and stuff that has kind of faded nowadays, a lot of it came from these early European customs to protect the women because that was part of the code of chivalry. Battle is the test of knighthood. You were not really a knight unless you had been in battle and you had tested yourself against another opponent. Combat is glory. Glory, well, is combat. I think that's pretty straightforward. You can win glory. You can be amazing in combat. Defend your charge until death. If you are given the responsibility to protect someone or to fight for someone, it is your duty to fight for them until you die. War is the flowering of chivalry, which means these battles, these constant fights, were a way for people to continue to follow this code of chivalry. Death to all who oppose the cause. If you don't agree with me, well, it's pretty straightforward. Arts are the food of the chivalrous. There's a lot of documentation about knights and nobility and people that follow the code of chivalry also being very interested in art and poetry and writing and verse and music. So they really respected that. Anger blinds and a cool head wins the day. When you get angry, and that happens to pretty much all of us, sometimes when we get mad, we kind of lose control of our emotions. And what the Code of Chivalry said is that when you get angry, you don't see things straight. So that is the Code of Chivalry. And I'm going to put this back very carefully because this is a very old, important document. Okay, let's see where we're at. Now, if you look over here, this is the Duchy of Brittany, and there are so many castles in this area. This place was fought over a lot over the last hundreds and hundreds of years, especially during the 100 Years' War. Let's take a look at some of these castles. That's pretty cool. That one's pretty cool too. I like that one. Wow. You see how they have the moat out in front? This one, look at that. Looks like you can park your boats right there. Now, let's get back to what actually happened. Okay, so really what it comes down to is there was one family called the Blois that were supported by the French. And then there was another family called the Montforts, which were supported by the English. And what happened was there was an argument about who should control this territory. And it goes back to relatives and people that were given the title to the land and people that didn't agree. It was pretty much an argument about who owned this land. But what ended up happening is these two sides decided to both claim that they owned this area, and they ended up fighting over it for quite a while. Now, our story of the Battle of 30 starts when a French captain of a castle named Jean de Bournemore, something like that, challenges another English man named Robert Bemborough to a duel. And it is said that rather than have them both duel each other, they decided to have a duel of 30 versus 30, hence why it's called the Battle of the 30. Now, they decided to have it in a way that it almost turned out to be like a medieval game. I mean, it really was. They had all these people join, they had peasants come and watch. It turned into like a tournament, even though it was an actual battle that was going to be fought with people dying. And so a huge crowd gathered. They picked a place where it was going to be, and they set up this battle. Now, on each side, they had 30 combatants, or 30 people participating. If you can see the picture here, the bigger names are knights, and the smaller names are squires. Okay? And there were some pretty notable names if you studied the 100 Years' War, I'm sure. And if you did more research, I'm sure you could learn some pretty interesting stuff about these guys. But let's get into the actual battle itself. Now, the battle itself was pretty interesting because they had some pretty specific rules. You had to fight on foot, you had to follow the code of chivalry, and you could use daggers, swords, axes, and hammers, I believe what it was. And they fought for hours and hours. And then at one point, they got tired, so they took a break. They literally sat down, like had a snack, drank some water, put bandages on, and then started fighting again. Now the combat went on for quite a while, and it got to a point where Bembro is slain, he is killed, and the English, who are kind of, I would say, losing at this point, decide to form like a defensive circle where they kind of get in a really tight circle and they stand next to each other so that the French can't actually get in. Now remember, they're covered in armor. Like even if you stab somebody, like you're gonna hit metal. It was difficult to actually kill somebody in this sort of combat. Now, it's said that a French squire broke the rules, got on a horse, and rammed into the English, which ended up breaking their tight little group, which allowed the French to come in and eventually win. Now, many see this as being not chivalrous or against the code of chivalry because he pretty much cheated. Now, there's a lot of stories that go along with this, primarily because it's a pretty interesting scenario. I mean, if you think about it, we're in the year 1351. There's 30 knights on each side in this big battle, and it's like a spectacle. It's like a show. And so throughout history, people have reviewed it, read about it, and each side celebrates it in a different way. Now, in the end, 6 French men died, and 9 of the English side died, which is not that many considering there were a total of 60 people involved. But it's said that just about everybody got injured in some way. Now, as we look at this final slide, the French built a monument. It was actually thought up by Napoleon in like 1811, but it never got built because Napoleon, well, actually, I don't know why it didn't get built, but it just never did. And so it later did get built. And if you go to France someday, you can actually go to the site where the Battle of 30 took place. Now, as I get to the end of this pretty awesome day in history, especially with my outfit and my sword, I realized I did forget something. I forgot the big idea, and some of you probably said that the minute I went past the first slide. So let me give it to you now. The big idea is that war has been very different throughout the ages. We've talked a lot about war in our days in history because they're pretty big events in history. This battle looks totally different than anything we've ever talked about. And I think that's why it's so interesting. Now, if I could choose one day in history to make a movie out of that already hasn't had a movie made out of it, I would say it was this. So, if you want to learn more about the Battle of 30, definitely look it up. It's a very interesting topic. Okay, that's your day in history. Goodbye.